Okay, so here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Name a Pod, where today he's back, y'all. Alistair Gray.
Hello,
He's in the
everybody.
house.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello,
Hello,
Andrea.
Alistair. I'm so glad we're back doing this again. Um, so today we've decided that, we're just gonna keep it nice and light and talk about free speech and social media and the kind of problems that these two concepts cause when we put them all together. Um, so let's just get into it, buddy.
Okay.
I was liking what you were saying earlier when we were just getting warmed up here about maybe this would be a fun spot to start. When we were talking about how social media can kind of blur the lines when it comes to defamation, right? Because it's one thing if maybe you say something that isn't true about somebody to your friend because you're, mad at a person or something, you're just being mean. Um, versus like printing something in a newspaper um about a person that you don't like or whatever for whatever reason you're lying about this person. But um social media is kind of like telling your friends online, but it's not the same as publishing in a newspaper, but it could be seen more than most
Yeah.
newspapers. So, um, yeah, let's start with that fun little can of worms. What do you think?
I think, well, I mean, certainly social media has added a new dimension to defamation specifically. I mean, previously, if we were in a group, if we were at a bar and we're talking about, say, someone who we know who we don't particularly like, and let's say I made something up about them, and let's say I made it up and I presented it in a way that made it obvious that I was joking. And everybody in our group at the bar realizes it, laughs, we have a drink, we get on, that's fine.
Yeah,
Now, let's say instead of doing that, I tweet it. Now,
right,
you may all see, like the people who know me might see it and be like, oh, that's a good joke, exactly the kind of joke Alastair would make. But there might be
right,
plenty of people who see it and they don't realize it's a joke.
right,
Especially as on social media, it's it's not easy to present jokes in the same way as you would if you like if I'm joking, I can say it in a certain way. I can have a certain facial expression, things like that. But if you if you're going to kind of write a joke down, you have to, especially if the 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 meaning of the joke, if the double meaning is integral to the joke being told as it is, being expressed as it is, then you can't really write down on as part of the tweet or whatever it is that you are telling a joke. So, if we were at the bar and I said, okay, I'm going to tell a joke now about a friend, but I don't actually mean it, here's the joke, it would have to be a really funny joke to get a laugh in that situation. But I don't need to do that. I don't need to explain that. And obviously, of course, if anybody in that group doesn't think I'm joking, I can reassure them afterwards that I was.
right.
But
Because
it's
there's
difficult on social
context.
media. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
context and there's the
yeah,
ability to just to check, immediately to say to me, "Did you
right.
mean that?" Like I say,
Did
no,
you?
I
You
didn't mean
were
it.
kidding, right?
Yeah,
Yes, I
right.
was.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Um, but so there's that, and there's also the fact that it's up for not it's up for anyone to see. And of course, you could object and say, well, if I take the time to make sure that the only people who can see my Twitter feed are people who I know and who would know that I'm joking, okay, but they can still take a screenshot of that. And if for
right.
whatever reason they don't recognize that
Yeah.
I'm joking that, they could post that and then, within an hour, because sometimes it pardon me, really doesn't take that long. Within an hour, they can they can have got thousands of people. They've shown that to thousands of people.
Hmm.
There's the example of Justine Sacco, the lady who she wrote a tweet that said, going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white. And it's like she most likely meant she was a comment about the fact that we don't really we don't put as much effort into helping African people who are victims of HIV in the way that we put into helping people who are victims in America or in England or things like
Right.
that. She certainly wasn't saying only black people get AIDS. I mean, like, I don't see how
Right.
someone could make that comment, but somebody she posted it and then she turned off her phone and then she spent time in Africa. She came back, and apparently she got back, and by the time she got off the plane on the way back, her life was over. Her career was over. Like she'd been
Yeah.
destroyed, all
Yeah.
because one or two people didn't didn't see that it was a joke, didn't see to ask her, and presented it as though it was serious. And then enough, because that's one I've been talking for a little bit here. I realize that the one last thing I'll say is, and this is another thing that we can talk about actually, because one of the things that happens on social media, what happens in life anyways, there's certain individuals who we will trust to tell us the truth. And they
Hmm.
may not actually be trustworthy individuals, but for whatever reason, we trust them. So somebody
Yeah.
may have seen a retweet of what Justine Sacco wrote, trust the person who retweeted it, and thought, well, this person wouldn't retweet it if it wasn't something worth retweeting. And
Hmm.
similarly, we see examples of individuals throughout social media who will present uh, their own idea about like what do we call it, like misinformation about certain
Oh yeah.
events, but they have enough people who trust them and who rely on them to inform them
Yeah.
that 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 misinformation is going to be experienced, recognized, misrecognized as fact. So,
Well, and this
yeah.
actually gets me that you brilliantly just led into something that I also wanted to bring up because this is how conspiracy theories start, you know, and conspiracy theories are, you know, that they start off as somebody's weird little idea, which could be, it could start off harmless, but some of them become extremely harmful, um, because they're just simply not true. And when you have enough people that believe that, it leads to just all sorts of horrible chaos. And I mean, the most nefarious example would be, and we talked about this early on when we first started the podcast. We talked about how dangerous someone like Alex Jones is, like saying that those school shootings didn't happen. Um, and because of social media and because of a platform, for some reason, he got a lot of people to believe it. Um, and it's just simply, I mean, what? Of course, those things happened and they were horrible. And yeah, he had to pay a lot of money to the families of the victims because of all of the harm and trauma that he caused these people. They were getting harassed. Um, some folks had to move because people were calling them liars and
Mm,
you know, it like death threats. It's like, God, they lost their kid and now they're getting death threats because people are telling them they're lying about losing a child. So, you know, when it comes to, just the spread of disinformation, um, I things like that, it really, really crosses a line between, you know, whatever you may think But you know, it's like when you were talking about like how a joke could be taken the wrong way. Alex Jones wasn't kidding about any of it. You know what I mean? So, uh, and I laugh there just because it's ironic, but like it does seem to um cause I don't know. It now I'm rambling, but yeah, it just causes so many problems when these kinds of things can get spread. Like you said, someone can see it, you know, all of a sudden thousands more people have seen it within a very, very short amount of time, right?
Yes, yes. It's the fact that you distinguished what Alex Jones did in that situation from a joke, I think is important because
Yeah.
um, I mean, first of all, in that situation, there would be ways in which he could have presented it that made it pretty clear to anybody listening that he was joking, but he didn't present it in that way,
Mm-mm.
to
He
my
was
knowledge. I've not heard
serious.
the original broadcast that he made,
He was
but
dead serious. It was
the problem
pretty
with that, I
nasty.
think,
Yeah.
so there's as your listeners may know, there's a very famous example from there's an excerpt from John Stuart Mill's book On Liberty, where he distinguishes. Um, so there's this. I'll read the passage because I've got it here. It's very short. It contains a word that may have another meaning in our society now. So remember, this was written in the 19th century. Starvers of the poor ought to be unmolested when simply circulated through the press, but may justly incur punishment when delivered orally to an excited mob assembled before the house of a corn dealer. And what that means is that in the case of, say, if we criticize somebody in the press without calling for any specific action that is non-judicial, like I think you could say, well, for example, you could say, we believe this individual there should be an inquiry into the behavior or conduct of this particular individual. And you can assume that such an inquiry would be legal or would be carried out by the proper authorities, right? There's a
Yeah.
difference between, let's say, if we said, um, uh, let's say there was a famous person, John Smith, right? And let's say John Smith is a very controversial figure because of things that he's said, but he's not necessarily ever been shown to do anything that has harmed anyone.
Hmm.
If I have a newspaper column or a podcast or something like that, and I use it to say, I don't trust John Smith. I think there's things he's not telling us. I think there needs to be an inquiry into what he's done. And I think that we as a public need to be suspicious of him and we need to be trying to find out information about him. There is a difference between that and if, say, I'm outside John Smith's house and there's a mob in front of me that
Hmm.
quite clearly, as Mill would describe it, an excited mob.
Yeah.
And if I'm saying that to that mob, the meaning of what I'm saying might be might be different, or it might be interpreted in such a way as to
Right.
bring about some kind of violence, some kind of dangerous activity.
Hmm.
So I think that we're going
You
back to
just
the
kind of described January 6th.
well, so that's something that we can get to in a minute because that's the thing about January the 6th. I'll say if it wasn't for the fact that there were various tweets and like I don't know about all the information of January the 6th. I think you know a bit more than it about me. But if it was the fact that, say, a group of people just turned up and just went into the Capitol building, it would have been a lot less controversial. And it would have been a lot harder to say that it was anything other than just a protest that got out of hand. But it
Hmm.
seems as though there are some details that suggest that it might have been more than that. However,
Yeah.
just getting back to my
I
example
watched it on TV.
quickly,
Yeah.
just really quickly, the last thing I'll say about my example is that um, there is, I was thinking about earlier today a thought experiment, right? I'll make this very quick. So imagine there's a person who's been programmed to kill upon hearing a particular phrase. and
Mm.
I know what that phrase
Sleeper
is,
agent. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And let's say I know that person's got a gun on them. And so all they have to do is hear this phrase and they will start shooting at people.
Mm.
If I know this phrase and I use the phrase, causing them to shoot people, knowing that that's going to happen, it seems arguable that I am complicit in the consequences of their actions. If,
Right.
on the other hand, I don't know that there is a phrase and I use it, then, so I don't know, let's say it's like the weather is clement today, right? Some sort of phrase that you wouldn't usually say, but you wouldn't necessarily assume activates a sleeper agent.
Right.
So,
Yeah, not something you would normally say, but
right, yeah. So let's say for whatever reason, I just say I sarcastically, I like the weather's clement today, right? And then that just triggers them.
right.
If I didn't know, then it's difficult to say that I am at fault. But if I knew that, let's say I knew there was a trigger phrase, I knew it was something unusual, I knew it had something to do with the weather, or I knew that it contained the word Clement or something like that, then it's harder to say that I play no part whatsoever in the consequences of the action and in the injury and it's harder to say I'm not responsible, at least in some way, for the injuries that were caused. And so I think going back to Alex Jones, I think it's arguable that the nature of his, was it a radio show he had? It was a radio show,
You had a
right?
radio show.
Yeah, so like
Yeah.
the nature of that radio show
And
was,
on some network, I mean, he was also televised in some way. I think there was
well,
a
I mean that
podcast.
just
There
that
was some
I
video
get the
element
point
to it
though
as
is that
well.
he had amassed an audience that seemed to be looking for conspiracy theories, seems to be looking for examples, however fantastical, of kind of nefarious motives, hidden motives, things like that. So knowing that this was his audience and knowing his audience was large enough such that there would at least be some people who might resort to dangerous behaviors, then it seems as though, first of all, it's difficult to say he's not at fault. And secondly, just thinking about that situation in general,
I mean, he was legally held liable for,
it's
yeah.
difficult to say that free speech is a defense in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. See, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And um, you know, I did see some of that trial. And yeah, he was found guilty. And
But can I just play devil's advocate for a moment?
well, that's your
Because
job.
that's, I've kind of told you my general opinion on this. What
It's
if,
literally your description in the book.
sure,
So
so let's say Alex Jones, for whatever reason, has information that he believes is convincing. And because of this information, he believed that the school shooting was fake, was staged. If he genuinely believes that it's staged, and then he broadcasts this, is this covered by freedom of speech? Because it seems as though, let's say, if we reverse it slightly, if we invert it ever so slightly, if we say, I don't know, that there's um a convention just down the street, and we believe that it is an ultra right wing, far right white supremacist group that is going to be having a meeting under the guise of, say, a bake sale, right? It
mhm.
seems like quite a fantastical claim to make, but if we genuinely believe that's what's happening, and we have some information that we could turn to say, look, this is why we believe it, then wouldn't it be, wouldn't it at least be important to allow us to broadcast that belief?
Right. Yeah, and that's where I think that's where things get gray. I mean, obviously, but I mean, sure, dead kids are nothing to really try to make up stories about, of course. There are lines, but to your point though, um, if it was like we really thought that there was, some white supremacist group holding a bake sale down the road, um, I think this is where like people just have to you have to be rational. This is where you have to stop and use the brain that we have and be like, maybe go check out the bake sale, see what's going on. If it doesn't seem like there's anything weird happening, if they're literally just selling cookies to people, well then you were wrong, right? And maybe one of them is a Nazi, but they're not telling anybody about it at the bake sale, so but okay, you know. But if they're selling cookies and handing out Nazi propaganda, we have a problem, you know. And we were correct, and that probably shouldn't be happening in the neighborhood. So, you know, I mean, there's just because there's freedom of speech and freedom of beliefs. Um, and but I feel like we're especially evolving into an era where a lot of that turns into hate. And oh, I know you and I have talked about this before just in our own conversations, but I think things like that, like blatant lies, stuff like that, you know, saying out loud to the world that you think you're better than every other person because of the color of your skin or whatever. These are horrible things. And that's hateful rhetoric. Um, where do we define the line between, you know, maybe someone thinks the earth is flat. We think that's silly, because it's not, but it's like, are they really hurting anybody with that belief versus some of the more nefarious examples that we've just been discussing? Where do we draw that line? That
Yeah, I
would
think,
be something I'd like to hear you pontificate on.
well, that's the difficulty, right? Is that
Yeah,
going back to what we were saying, there's um okay, let me change this episode slightly. My thought experiment about the man and the trigger phrase. Like,
right.
imagine that imagine that the trigger phrase is the government is coming, right? Now,
Okay, yeah.
imagine that you're thinking like there's not really any, and that's the trigger phrase. You know that the government is coming is a trigger phrase. If you say it, the person you're with will get out the gun, they'll start shooting at people. You're not the one that programmed them with that trigger phrase, but you know that's what it is. Now, let's say
Right.
you start watching various things, you start seeing various videos, you start reading various things, and you come to the conclusion that the government is coming, and you're convinced that the government is coming.
Right.
You run out into the town and you're about to say, the government is coming, as in, prepare yourselves, they're coming to take whatever it is they're going to take. Or even like the aliens are coming, or just some force.
That Paul Revere moment.
Right, right. The
Yeah.
British are coming, yeah. But let's make it the aliens are coming instead of the
The
government are coming.
aliens are
So
coming. Why
the
not? That's
aliens, and
fun.
let's say you have spent time and you think to yourself that you are now convinced that aliens are on their way and that they're going to destroy us.
Hmm.
You spot this person, and in that one instant, you have to decide whether you take the risk because maybe you're wrong, maybe aliens aren't coming, maybe you've fallen down some sort of internet rabbit hole, right? But if you have and you don't say anything, then okay, nobody is going and you don't say anything, then no one's going to die because you're not going to say the phrase. Your friends, the person's not going to start opening fire. That's fine. Okay. But you've read enough to know that if you don't say it, then many people may die. All sorts of things may happen because the aliens are coming. So you, in that moment, I guess my point with this is, and I've just kind of thought about this off the top of my head, so I don't think it's quite raw. It needs to be processed. But the point is, if you believe that there is a genuine threat, a genuine danger, or something that you need to communicate to people, and you know that by doing so, it's going to bring about injury in some way, what do you do in that situation? And I think that part of the problem is certainly we would want a law that, and I think we have laws that prevent people
Yeah.
from, maybe we have laws that prevent people from like arbitrarily running into public places and just
The building's
screaming
on
things
fire.
out.
Like,
Yeah, things like
yeah,
that. Although, I mean, my understanding is that that age-old, slightly cliched example of the you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, that's not actually true, and it depends
it's
upon
not
various
actually
other
true,
factors.
but
But
I
the point
think it
is
would
that,
still people would get upset and it would probably cause panic and
but the
things that
problem
doesn't
is that
cause.
if you believe there is a fire and you know that you don't have enough time to check, like you smell smoke and
Mhm.
you think if there is a fire, I don't have enough time to go down, check, and come up. So I need to just go and shout fire and take whatever happens. And whatever happens, happens. The reason you're doing it is because you want to save people's lives. There's something in philosophy known as the principle of double effect. I might have mentioned on this before. It's controversial, and I don't
Yeah.
myself don't necessarily agree with it, but it's based on the idea that sometimes there may be something that we want to do, the outcome of which is morally unjustifiable, but the reason for doing it is morally justifiable. So the
Ah.
classic example is it's wartime and you are at a stalemate with the enemy.
Mhm.
You're each losing as many troops as the other. This war has been carrying on for years, and then you suddenly discover information that suggests that there is a munitions factory hidden away in that
Mhm.
country. And you know, if you can take that munitions factory out, then that will give you an advantage and it will certainly speed up that war and make it end a lot sooner. You also know that there is a town right the uh, next to the munitions factory, and everybody who works in the factory lives in the town. So you know there's families there, you know there's children there. So the only thing you can do is to bomb the factory. So what is the morally correct thing to do? And the principle of double effect would say if your intention is to end the war, then anything else you do can be called what's called a double effect. So it's like oh well, it's not a, it's a consequence that you knew was going to happen, but you didn't intend for it to happen.
Right.
Now it's controversial because of course you know it's going to happen. But the
Right.
idea is it's the choice you have has to be between at least two equally undesirable consequences. So either you blow up a munitions factory, but possibly kill a number of innocent civilians as well, or you let the war carry on and many, many more people will die.
Yeah.
So similarly, if, and I mean, this may be a big if, but if Alex Jones genuinely believed that that the people involved in that school shooting were actors, and if he believed there was some sort of danger that they represented, then it seems difficult to say that he still shouldn't have said anything at all. The problem is, of course, I think it's arguable that we know something that he didn't.
Right. Well,
We
yeah, of
know,
course.
I think it's arguable that we know it wasn't fake. We know it wasn't caused by actors. We know it was actual people involved in that massacre. It was actual children being killed, like actual people's lives were affected and so on. If he didn't know that, and we can probably never say for certain whether he did or didn't, if he didn't know that, then and even if he didn't know that, even if the reason was because he had some sort of cognitive impairment or some sort of mental illness or something like that,
I think it could be
it's
wagered to say that that might be true.
yeah, it could be, but like then the point is, if he didn't have access to that knowledge, then it's harder to say that either he intended for those families' lives to be, for those families to be harassed in the way that they were, and he may even have genuinely believed that he was doing good, even if he wasn't. And that's what makes this so difficult, because I think that ordinarily, um, okay, so I'm gonna say one thing that I think is not this is not me playing devil's advocate for a moment. This is me just sort of saying something honestly. I think Alex Jones, I think maybe the most important thing to think about was that I don't think that even if he was right, even if he had been correct, and that it was a staged shooting, it still wasn't so urgent. Like him, how do I put this? It wasn't so urgent that he had to tell anyone, that he couldn't have looked it up and tried to find out information about it himself. And that maybe the biggest problem was that he just didn't look into it. He just didn't do enough research, and he had the time to do that. And instead, he presented his opinion as though it was an informed opinion without checking to see if it was an informed opinion.
Oh yeah, and I mean, we could call someone like that, like a bullshit artist, right? Like someone
Right.
who,
Yes. Yes.
you know, but I think this is a little deeper than that. And, he's a tough example because I do think that there is something honestly not right with him to begin with. But, but yeah, there's plenty of bullshit artists out there that are just people that are a little overconfident. They don't know everything and they can just and will talk out of their ass. Um, but depending on that, like that type of personality, is typically like, they're talking out of their ass when they do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fairly obvious. Um,
Oh yeah, I on that subject, and
it
Coulter was on Bill Maher's show the other day, and I do
Oh
keep
yeah, we
thinking
watched that. Oh
that
my
there's a way
God.
in which it doesn't matter what anyone
It
says,
was a little
she's always able
painful.
to disagree with them, and I think
It
I
was a
don't know if
little painful
anybody
to
can
watch.
actually be that anyone can disagree that much to that extent so consistently without having
I
practiced
mean,
it in some way,
yeah, I mean,
that being a
def
character or something.
yeah, like it's the definition of being a contrarian, like
Right. Yeah.
no
Yeah.
matter what you say, I disagree with you. And oh yeah, yeah, we watched that too. That was a little interesting. Um, hmm. Because again, because she's one of those people. There's people on Fox News that they're amazing bullshit artists. They use very, very specific talking points. And then they just kind of make up the rest around it
Yeah.
to get people excited about something, but in all of the wrong and weird ways possible.
Did you ever see a documentary called Outfoxed?
No.
Like this is an old documentary, so it dates back to about 2005, 2006, I think, maybe
Okay.
even before then. But one of the bits, I don't know how credible the documentary is, so I'm just I will say that they're just assuming that it's a well-informed, well-researched documentary. There's a part where an unnamed ex-Fox employee says that the reason that nearly all of the on-air personalities are so right-wing is because at the time Rupert Murdoch realized that that was what would make him money, and that if being ultra left wing suddenly became profitable, then Fox News would just switch and become left wing. Now, I don't know
Mm,
for certain if that would happen or not. My point is simply that this is something that this uh, unnamed person said. You can go, anyone listen to this if they want to, they can go back and check it. It's a documentary, it's called Outfoxed. I can't remember what the name of the documentary filmmaker is called, but I'm sure you'll be able to find information about it online. But
sure.
it's sort of the fact that there are any number of Fox News contributors who might not necessarily be conservative, or if they are, they might be moderate conservative, but they're paid to sort of play a character. Similar, like if you're a wrestler, you might not necessarily be a pimp, but you're played to play a pimp, or you might not
Yeah.
necessarily be uh, a Christian preacher or what. I'm just making up, like. But there's a phrase in wrestling. There's this idea that your character is you turned up to 11. So it might
Hmm.
be that that's something that we're seeing on a lot of, and we may have been seeing that with Alex Jones as well. I mean, it did occur to me that like one of the things he could have said, um, like, I'm going to tell you my opinion on this, but this is my opinion. There's still there's still research to do. You shouldn't act on this. Like he could have said things to his audience and said, look, like I believe it was staged, and then he could have said to them, but you should not act on that. You shouldn't harass the people involved just in case I'm wrong, stuff like that. And he didn't say any of those things to
No,
my knowledge.
no, he didn't at all. He just presented it as if it were fact, to the people that listen to him. So,
So the real problem then was not so much what he said, but how he said what he said.
yeah, I mean, and I think that's where, because again, he was found guilty of defamation as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's a hard thing to legally prove. And so when it is legally proven, I mean, you really have had to kind of almost making a conscious, concerted effort to talk shit that you shouldn't be saying because it's just factually not true, and the fact that it does hurt people and cause harm, not just mentally, but people getting harassed and, having to move
Mm,
because they can't stay where they're at because there's people on their lawn every day calling them
yeah,
liars when they've lost a child. So, it like when it comes to, because, I mean, we can have different like beliefs. I mean, I I like to read tarot cards and stuff. Does that belief hurt anyone? No. It doesn't hurt anyone.
mm,
Um, like if you are a religious person who just, you know, you have your faith with yourself and your family or some of your friends or whatever that may share it with you. You're not trying to shove it down anybody else's throat. That
yeah,
doesn't hurt
yeah,
anyone, you know? And so like I think it's hard, especially with social media, um, where we can like draw some of these lines where it's like, certain beliefs are totally fine, harmless, and things
right,
that people we don't all agree on, whatever, that's fine. But it's becoming more and more obvious that having such easy accessibility or such wait, what am I trying to say? Easy access to um just presenting whatever we believe.
yeah, yeah.
When
That's a
put
big,
in
that's a very important
Yeah,
part of it, actually.
yeah, when
That
put
it's very easy for us to
it can be
just,
used for evil. It really
you
can.
don't have to wait for, you can present it as something that is credible without having to make it go through certain channels of credibility, if that makes sense.
Do you remember that episode? I know you love American Dad. Do you remember that episode of American Dad where Stan awakes Haley as a sleeper agent?
Oh, I've seen so many episodes of that now. And like, it's one of those shows where it found its footing a little bit later than most series do. But
Hmm.
when it did, it's arguably the best cartoon on TV, I think, at the moment.
Oh, it's so
Um,
good. But you specifically reminded me of this when you were talking about
yeah, yeah.
the phrase to awake the sleeper agent.
Okay. What was the phrase
The
for
phrase
Stan?
the phrase for Stan to awake Haley as a sleeper agent had to be something that no one would ever say.
Right.
Because you were saying, like, even if it was something you wouldn't normally say, what if you accidentally said it and you didn't know, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it had to be something that no one would ever say. So the phrase was, I'm getting tired of this orgasm.
And I imagine that there is a point when
Or
someone
I'm
actually
getting fed up with
says
this
that,
orgasm.
right?
Yeah.
But is there a point in the show where she says that or somebody says that?
No, Stan says it to awake Haley as a sleeper
Oh,
agent
I see.
because
And yeah, I get it.
he
Yeah.
thinks he's going to be able to control her, and then she ends up wanting to, like, her whole thing is she has to kill Stan. So like, it's
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's just really
There's
funny.
some episodes of that show that are so unbelievably imaginative. That
That one's really good. If I find the actual
I think
episode, I'll send
when
it.
they embraced going fully surreal, that was when it clicked. When
Oh
they
yeah.
realized that we don't have to make this realistic in the way that like Cleveland Show or Family Guy was. And so they started that long running bit about like how Roger does the golden turd, and then it has that sort of quality to it, like Lord of the Rings, when anybody who finds it becomes
Yeah.
obsessed with it.
It
And
was
just every now
obsessed.
and again, you'll get like a 10-minute segment just where somebody has found it and they end up murdering someone in order to keep it or something like that. And then the other episode I loved was when um, Stan had arranged for Jeff to be kidnapped by aliens. And there's an
Oh yeah.
episode that's entirely based around this song by this band called Wax Fang called Majestic.
Yeah.
And the whole
Yeah.
episode is just like about how Jeff he doesn't want to forget Haley, so he has to fight against this creature in order to make sure he doesn't. And
Majestic.
then, like right at the end, he's halfway across the galaxy, but he steals a spaceship with like a couple of other people and decides he's going to try and make it to Earth. It's a really unusual thing to think of, but it just works so well.
Oh yeah.
No,
Yeah, I
I
think
love American Dad. I really love
that
American Dad.
so good.
Yeah,
And we do love the Majestic episode. That one's really good.
and all of Roger's personalities, especially. Um, there's one episode where all of Roger's personalities have come to life and they're all
Yes.
charging down this hill
Yeah.
and they're all saying their names. And then when it gets to Ricky Spanish, it just goes, Ricky Spanish. Sorry, this will be the
We
last
love
one I
you,
go
Seth
into.
MacFarlane.